Shalom again, family. So I said that we were going to talk about God's image on this Sabbath, and basically this lesson is going to be based on Genesis 1:27, which reads, So God created man in His own image." And so I want to have you ask yourself and seek out the answer to the question, what is God's image? What does it mean to have been created in His image? In 127 it says, "So God created man in His own image," and then it goes on to tell us what that image is. It says, "In the image of God created He him, male and female created He them." And what this is saying is that God's image, which He created a man in, is masculine and feminine. It's male and female. All right. And if you look at the Hebrew words for this male and female, what you get is Zakar and Nakaba. Zakar is the Hebrew word for masculine, and Nakaba is the Hebrew word for feminine or female. So the first point is that God's image is both male and female, or masculine and feminine. And we see this in Genesis 1:27. The second point is that this is also how humans were created to function. We were created to function as these two parts, which makes up God's image, masculine and a feminine. This can also be seen as a dominant and a recessive, in a sense. Whereas the male is the dominant. The male dominant meaning that it is the physical, it's what could be seen, it has the last say. It's the tangible thing. And the female, or the Nakaba, being the feminine or the recessive, which it cannot be seen. It's the things that cannot be seen about an individual. And so these two things this is the image of God, and is the image that man were created in, which is the image of God. And so we learn more about this masculine and this feminine in Genesis 1-4. In Genesis 1-4, we see we're given some stories and some demonstrations of God's character as being masculine and feminine. The thing that we need to really understand is that this being masculine and feminine simply means that everything has a function. All right, everything has its own function. The feminine thing has its thing that it needs to do properly, and the masculine thing has its thing that is different, that it needs to do properly, right? In order for anything to be functional, right? So functional is when we see good and evil in the Bible, that contrast, it's really functional and dysfunctional, right? And so that means that a thing works as it was intended to work, like a grass grows. That's what it was intended to do. It is functional, right? A tree bears fruit. That's what it was intended to do. It is functional. And anything that does not do that is dysfunctional, right? It is evil, dysfunctional. It does not do what it was intended to do. So throughout chapter 1, we see God is creating all these things, and He's creating these things in preparation for humanity. So not only does He create these things in His image, masculine and feminine, but He also creates the human in His image. And the things that He created before He created the human was in preparation for the human, or preparation for humanity. All right. And so God, the masculine, and I'm gonna call them Daddy God and Mama God, all right? And don't think no weird stuff. That simply means that God in His masculine capacity versus God in His feminine capacity, okay? So Daddy God creates, right? He creates all this stuff in preparation for the human, and it is sources that are intended to provide for and to protect the human. These are the things that He created before He created the human, the things that the humans would need to be sustained, right? And so that is his father-like part of his image, the masculine, the thing that is concerned with the physical. But then here in 2:17, in Genesis 2:17, God instructed the humans not to eat from the tree of knowledge and warned that when they did eat from it, not if, but when they did eat from it, that they would be subject to death. All right. And so this is the feminine. This is Mama God, right? Saying, don't do this, because if you do this, this bad thing will happen. This will be the outcome, right? So Mama God's job is to teach and to counsel. So God, our God, Elohim, he is feminine and masculine. His masculine is the provider and protector of mankind, and his feminine, or his spirit, is the teacher and the counsel of mankind. You get it? All right. And so we go on, we see more evidence of this, more proof of this in Genesis 2:18. We see another example of Mama God, right? Of the feminine part of the God image. And it's when God warns that it was not good for a human to be alone, that the human needed a helper, right? And so it's Mama God who's saying it is evil, it is not good for man to be alone. The man needs a helper. And then so in response to Mama God, the masculine part of God, Daddy God, in 2:23 says, it says God took a part of the human and created a woman from it. So Daddy God, masculine God, the one concerned with the physical things, he creates for his son Adam a wife. And he does it by taking from Adam, the human, and he creates the woman out of the human, essentially separating the human into two different beings. One human, two beings. And when they are married, they are supposed to become one human again. All right, so that's another story. But chapters 1-4 will tell you a lot about life, about this world, about our purpose, about marriage, about what's what and who's who, when, why, how, where, when, all this other stuff. It will tell you if you get in and you study it enough. But we're going to go on. We have some more examples of God's feminine versus his masculine character. And so when he creates the woman for the man, again, he is being the provider and the protector. He is giving the human a counterpart that is separate but the same. They work together as a unit in order to function. If they are not functioning as a unit, then they are not functioning. And that is what Genesis teaches us. In Genesis 3:14-19, God curses the serpent, then Eve, and then Adam. He tells them all what will happen as a result of their choices, right? So as a result of their choices, we call it curses, but you can also look at it as a prophecy. God is not punishing them necessarily, but he's telling them, because you have made these choices, this is the hardship that you will face throughout your lives, right? And that is, again, Mama God coming in, stepping in, giving that spiritual counsel and that teaching, and that is the feminine part of God's image that we see demonstrated here. We go over into the masculine when God clothes Adam and Eve immediately after. So we say that he cursed Adam and Eve and the serpent. And the thing is, if we believe that he cursed them, then it would be hard to understand why he would then clothe them, right? But when we come to understand what a curse, this curse really is, basically it's God saying, look, because you did this, these are all the things that is going to happen as a result of what you have done. It's that simple. And so after he tells them, he counsels them like a mother should. He tells to Adam and Eve that, you know, everything that will happen to him and them, and that they will face as a result of their error, of their disobedience. he immediately goes to clothe them. He makes clothes for them and he puts it on them and he dresses them. Now, that is masculine, right? It doesn't seem that way. That's not what we've been told in this world, but that is masculine. That is our God providing for and protecting his creation. All right. This is still evident today, but again, that's another story. We're going to try and stick to the basics. But God, after he quote unquote curses Adam and Eve, he makes clothes for them and he clothes them. That is love. That is the Father doing what the Father does. But it was Mama God who was pointing the finger and saying, you did this, now this is going to happen. You did that, now that is going to happen. And this is Mama God's way of teaching her children, teaching Adam and Eve a lesson about disobedience, really. And ultimately telling them about all the things that were going to happen so that they can be aware going forward of what they would have to face, and they would recognize it as it happened, at least after it happened, and begin to make changes and come to trust in God, and in his will and what he says, and not have to doubt him anymore like Eve did in that garden. But again, that's a whole nother story. I'm gonna stick to the basics. So moving forward, we see another example of Daddy God. It says in Genesis 3:23, God sent Adam and Eve from the garden. God sent Adam and Eve from the garden. And so here the Daddy God is carrying out his physical duties and responsibility to protect and to keep Adam and Eve, believe it or not. He's sending them out of the garden in order to protect and to keep them. Why? It tells us why, and we'll talk about that on the next the next slide. But it tells us, I'm gonna sum it up. It basically tells us that the reason why he sent them out the garden is because them now having knowledge of good and evil and also having access to the tree of life was a very dangerous situation. So they needed to take a particular path which would be guarded by the cherubims in order to get back to the tree of life. So they had to be sent out of the garden and take this path, right, or go this certain way or direction that humanity would have to take before they can get back to the tree. And that's basically what we learn in Genesis. And then we see again where God counsels Cain about his offering in 4, 6, and 7, where he tells Cain, why are you upset? Why are you angry? Why are you saddened? If you do well, I will also elevate you. I will also recognize you. I will also look at you in the same way that I have looked at Abel. And he tells him, don't let evil take over you. This is silliness, right? When you do good, you will get good. When you do bad, you won't get good. And it's that simple. And so God is counseling, and Mama God is counseling Cain in that respect. But then Cain goes and he kills his brother anyway. And God does the same thing that he did with Adam and Eve. He quote unquote curses Cain. And basically, once again, what he's telling Cain in Genesis 4, 9 through 12 is that he will have to face or endure all these different things as a result of what he has done. And so basically, well, first of all, let's get back, and then we see Mama God again. We see Daddy God again when in Genesis 4:16, after Cain cries out to God, God gives him a mark of protection and he sends him away from the land and his presence. And so that's God again. So it's God who's giving him the mark to protect him. It's the masculine God giving him the mark to protect him. It's also the masculine God, the masculine side of God. Of course, there is only one God, right? But it's the masculine part of God or side of God that sends him away from the land, just like it was the masculine God who sent Adam and Eve away from the land. And so basically, God the Father says, you know what, you did not listen to your mother when she told you not to do this, and so now you have to go. It's that simple, right? And the mother says, now that you have to go, here's all the hard things that you're going to face. I'm going to prepare you for it ahead of time. These bad things are going to happen as a result of your dysfunction. And basically, the dysfunction, it really all boils down to the fact that when masculine and feminine God, or masculine and feminine as in the mother and the father, are not able or allowed to function in their own capacity for their children, then the children have to go out into the world like Adam and Eve did. They have to go out of the garden, and like Cain did, have to go out of the land and experience life and learn the hard way, right? So that's basically what it is. It's if you don't submit to God, if you don't as an individual, and as a child, if a child does not submit to his or her parents, then that it is at that point that that child has to be sent out into the world to learn from their own experiences. And God tells us, the Bible tells us, that if you do it that way, it is going to be very difficult, right? But that's just how it is. And so the next thing that we're going to look at is a few verses in Genesis 3:5. It says, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And then in 3:22, we hear a very similar statement from God himself. It says, and Yahuwah God said, behold, the human is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now lest he put forth his hand and take as also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever. And this is what I was talking about. So here in 3:22, God explains to us what he was protecting the humans from, what he was protecting Adam and Eve from. And he was protecting them from themselves, basically. So he says that they were bold enough to go and eat from the tree of knowledge. They're also going to be bold enough to go and eat from the tree of life. And what happens to a person who has no spiritual life, who has then gained access to an eternal physical life? That's dangerous, very dangerous. And so God was protecting humanity from itself by putting them out of the garden. Therefore, Yahuwah God sent him forth from the garden of Eden, to till the ground from whence he was taken. And so this is Cain. So Yahuwah did the same thing to Cain. He sends him out from the garden. No, I'm sorry. This is not Cain. This is Adam and Eve. So he sends them out from the garden. And they now have to go work and do things the hard way, when they had it made in Eden, right? And so this goes back to what I was just saying in the previous slide, that God the Father, he puts Eden and he puts Adam and Eve and Cain out of their lands, and they have to go do things the hard way and learn things the hard way. And the same thing goes in a household with our families and with our children. When our children decide that they're old enough to be their own counselor and teacher, or their own provider, and that is the time, that's when they really become adults. That's when they are no longer their parents' responsibility. I don't care how old they are. The fact of the matter is that when a child becomes like the parent, it begins to function as the parent, then that child no longer has a need for a parent, right? And so this is the idea that the Bible gets across. Now on in modern times, we might envision a bunch of 13-year-old children who think they grown and whose parents put them out. But on the other extreme, the truth is that a parent in this time would need to be a parent to their children, have their children, in under their watch, for much longer than 18 years old, much longer than we do now. If you read the Bible, if you study the Bible, what you'll notice is that all the Israelite forefathers, the patriarchs of the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they were getting married when they were 40 years old. And when they got married at 40 years old, their parent chose their wives. So that says a lot. It says that child was still was still submitting to their parent at the age of 40 years old. They were still submitting to their parent. Their parent was still their provider, was still their teacher, their counselor, and their guides. And you see this repeatedly in the Old Testament among the Hebraic culture. And this is why. It's because there was no magic age where a child became an adult. It was the point at which the child refused the counsel of the parent and was providing for and protecting himself or his own interests, put it that way. Now, it doesn't mean that they do it well. It doesn't mean that they do it functionally. It doesn't mean that a daughter who leaves home knows right from wrong and is a good teacher and counselor in the things of God, and is a good provider or with a good provider and protector. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that the child has a spirit that is counseled by something somewhere, and that the child's flesh or the child's covering or husband is providing for and protecting that thing that child's spirit has. Right? So it doesn't have to be God. It could be a bunch of wrong things. It could be a bunch of bad things. Nonetheless, the child is being counseled and taught something from someone somewhere that's not their parent or God. Okay? And it's those things that the flesh of that child or the husband of that child, if it's because she's given in marriage, there's those things that person has to then protect and guard. If they're protecting the things that the girl holds true and dear, and that the girl desires. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's good things, right? So just keep that in mind. But again, that's for another video. The fact of the matter is that the image of God is still present, okay? And so the masculine flesh is represented in mankind by the man, of course, and the feminine spirit is represented in mankind by the woman, okay? And the feminine spirit within ourselves, right? So we also, as individuals, we have flesh and we have a spirit, correct? Okay. So, as an individual, we have flesh and we have a spirit. Our spirit it's like a vessel. It's like a shell. It's not good or bad. It's not evil or righteous. It's just a spirit. And the spirit that is a vessel is filled up with stuff, right? And so you fill the spirit with stuff, whatever your heart so desires. You fill it up with that stuff. And then that spirit becomes your character. It becomes who you are, right? At your very core. And if you're filling yourself up with God and with the things of God, well, then you have a spirit that is like God, and God's spirit dwells in you. But if you are filling yourself up with things that are not of God, well, then your spirit and your character will manifest that truth, that you're not of God. Taking it a step further, your flesh will manifest that truth. It will do what is necessary to protect your own inner desires, to protect your spirit, to protect what you have put in your spirit, right? And so as it does that, it reveals what is near and dear to an individual's heart, because their flesh will only do what it needs to do to protect the things that are stored up inside of an individual's spirit. Okay, so if God is what is filling my spirit, then my flesh, everything my flesh do is going to be to protect that, right? If money is what fills my spirit, or desire for money is what fills my spirit, then everything that my flesh does is going to be to protect that. If physical pleasure, sexual pleasure is what fills my spirit, then everything that my flesh do is going to be to protect and keep that thing, right? And so it is very, very deep, yet it's very simple, and it's very foundational. It's something that we all need to know and should know about ourselves, how God created us, what it means to be created in his image. And so we're gonna back up just a bit and talk about the image of God in the husband and wife. The image of God is a single unit that is both male and female, right? And so we talk about Mama God, Daddy God. We really have to think about this carefully, because I'm not saying that there are two gods. There's one God. Just like the husband and wife is one flesh, there is one God. Okay, the husband and wife, the union of the husband and wife is representing the image of God. Therefore, we know that the image of God is two parts but one God. Okay, and so the two parts is the spirit of God and the masculine, the actual being of God, which deals with the things that are physical, right, and the things of the flesh, ensuring that we have resources to eat and to drink and to be protected from the things of this world, right? So he gives us the physical things that we need in order to survive, in order to live, in order to breathe, right? And so that's like Daddy God. That's the masculine side of this unit, of this union, that is God. And then you have the feminine side of this union, which is still the same God. Okay. It says in Genesis 2:24, therefore shall man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Humanity, as a representation of the image of God, is one female, one male, and together they become one flesh, right? So they need each other in order to exist. Okay, they cannot exist without each other, and so they are one. The husband and wife, i.e. Adam and Eve, are representative of this unit. Adam is the more physical counterpart, whose job it is to protect and provide for Eve and their children. Remember all that God's masculine image accomplished. He created the earth, he planted food, he gave a companion to his son Adam, etc. Eve is the more spiritual counterpart, whose job it is to teach and to counsel Adam and his children. Remember all that God's feminine image accomplished: counseling the humans not to eat the fruit, counseling Cain not to allow sin to control him, and he warned them of what would happen as a result of their errors, right? And so this is the feminine part of God's image. Now, the image of God is also present in the functional family, as we kind of touched on a little bit before. Again, there is one two-part unit in a functioning family. It does not change. Just because I have children, that two-part unit does not change. It is still the husband and the wife. All right? And so how does this work? In a functional family, the wife, being representative of the spirit, is filled with the Spirit of God. She is her desires are toward God. And so God fills her, directs her, guides her, and she in turn teaches what she learns to her family or to her husband. Okay? She tells it to her husband. Kind of like Eve went back and gave Adam the fruit. Now we see this as a bad thing, but Eve did exactly what she was built to do. She was built to get the information and bring it back to her husband. All right? So again, that's another video. But so then the mother and the mother and the father, or the wife and the husband, are on one accord, right? They're the same mind. God has given something to the wife, understanding and wisdom and knowledge, and the wife is passing this on to the husband, or including the husband in on the message, right? And then the children should be, in a functional family, the children would be operating under the same will. The whole family is operating under this same will that came through the spirit, right? Or through the wife. And so the whole family operates under that same will, including the children. Now, when the children begins to act outside of this will, right? And so you have the mother and the father, and when the children begin to go off and do their own thing, and then it becomes dysfunctional. If the child is not acting in the will, under the will of their parents, who are acting under the will of God, then the family is dysfunctional. So also in a dysfunctional family, what you end up with is too many husbands and too many wives. God says that he gave one feminine, one masculine, one man, one woman. This is the image of God. All right. If you're not in this image, then you're not in his image. It's become something else. Okay. And that cannot stand. And because it cannot stand, it causes ruins, right? It causes trouble, chaos, and problems. And it just does not function because it is not functional. Okay. It does not work because God is not present. And at the end of the day, this is what it comes down to. This is what all this comes down to. If God's image is not present, it will not work. And the warnings or the curses of Adam, Eve, the serpent, and Cain all are representative of what happens when something is not functioning, if it's not functional anymore. See, the problem with Eve and Adam is not necessarily that she ate from the tree, but that she allowed a third party to feed her spirit, and that third party was the serpent. And so that's something to think about too. So now she has a new counselor or teacher that is not God, and that counselor or teacher was the serpent. And so when she let the serpent become her counselor and teacher, and she imparted the will of the serpent on her husband, that is where she went wrong. Okay. And so we have to really think deeply about these situations. God already said she was going to eat from the tree. Adam was going to eat from the tree. It was already a done deal. He prophesied it before it happened. The problem is not that they ate from the tree. The problem is that they obeyed the will of the serpent when they did that. Okay? And not the will of God. And that made them dysfunctional. Going back to this image of the flesh and the spirit. Remember I said the flesh, the masculine flesh is represented by a man in a marriage, a father in a parent-child relationship, and by God, the protector and the provider, right? So when God's role is as a protector and a provider, that is the masculine, right? And within ourselves, the masculine is simply our body, our flesh, the things that can be seen and touched, okay? And the feminine is simply the things about us or within us that cannot be seen and touched, okay? And so it's the things that we put into ourselves And it's really the vessel that holds the things that we put into ourselves. Okay. And so that could be good or bad. And sometimes we have a little bit of both. But at the end of the day, the goal, I guess, is to pour so much God into that spirit that everything that is not like him comes flowing out the top. Okay, so that is the goal, to continue to pour more and more of God into our spirit, because a lot of times as we grow up, we take on things from our past, from our childhood, at which point we had no control. We did not know the truth. We did not know God. We did not know this truth and about his image, right? We didn't know that we needed to put more God in us in order to weed out what was not like God. And that's okay. So we still have some things. We have some remnants of the ungodly things in us. All of us do, I believe. But the goal is to fill your spirit up, fill your vessel up. It has a maximum capacity, right? So if you keep filling it up with the things of God, it will push out the things that are not of God from you. And you'll be filled with all things that are of God. And when you're filled with things that are all of God, then you are filled with the Spirit of God, meaning you have the character of the one and true living God. And so this message is very powerful, and it's a message that we must have and we must understand if we are truly going to believe, which, like I said, believing is knowing in the previous video. If we're going to believe that our Messiah came and died for us and he rose again on the third day, and that he is our salvation, and God gave him to us that we might be saved from the adversarial powers of this world. If we believe all that, then we have to understand why we were here in the first place. And part of understanding why we are here, why we were sent here, is understanding this concept of the masculine and the feminine image of God that God created us in. This image will always exist. Know that. Whether you're putting good or bad into yourself, the image will always be there. And so whatever you put into yourself is the fruit that you will bear. So Jesus also teaches us this. Our Messiah teaches us in Matthew 12:33. He says, either make the tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and the fruit corrupt. For the tree is known by his fruit. In verse 35 of chapter 12 of Matthew, he goes on to say, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. Also in Luke 6:44 it says, for every tree is known by his own fruit. And so the message that Yahushua, the Hamashiach, was trying to get through to us, and is still getting through to us on this day, is that we fill our spirits with things, with something. In one instance, he refers to the things that fill the spirit as the tree, and the things that it produces as the fruit. And then a couple of verses down, he refers to the thing that fills the spirit as the treasure of the heart. And either the man's treasure is good or it is evil. In other words, either it is functional or it is dysfunctional. And if it is functional, then functional things come forth from this fruit, this tree, or from this man's treasure. And if it is dysfunctional, then dysfunction comes from this man's treasure. Those are the things that he puts out into the world. So Jesus already taught us the same concept, not a new concept. Notice that this concept takes us all the way back to Genesis 1. And so Yahushua is teaching us things that we probably wouldn't otherwise understand, and that many people probably did not understand even in his time. He's teaching us that this vessel that we call a spirit that is within us is a space that is intended to be filled with God and with the things of God. But some of us make the choice to fill this space, this vessel, with things that are not of God. And so then you have a God image, but then you are filling ungodly things into the image and causing this image of God to produce ungodly things. And that's in conflict with nature. It's in conflict with God and with how he works in general. And so that will not work. What God needs us and wants us to do is to fill his image, his vessel, with things that belong to him and the things that are like him. Okay? And become whole and be made whole and be more like him, which is what Yahushua came and taught us, that we can be like him. And he gives us pointers and tips and even step-by-step instruction on what to do in order to be like our Father. And so clearly what we learn is that the creation in the beginning, in order to be fulfilled, Jesus came to fulfill that creation so that it can begin to function. It can do what it was originally created to do. All right? It can do, I'm repeating it, what it was originally created to do. But what happens when we don't know what it was originally created to do? What happens when we don't understand what humanity was created to do? And what it's supposed to be doing, how it's supposed to be functioning. If we're all just here out of a random coincidence, then none of this matters. But if you say and you believe that we are not here out of some random coincidence, but that we were in fact intentionally created by a creator, then it's a good place to start to understand why and how we were created, and understand what our vulnerabilities are, and which is essentially that we don't know. We are vulnerable because we do not know the image of God. We are vulnerable because we do not understand that we have this space in us called a spirit that is intended to be filled up with God and with the things of God and with the Spirit of God, the character of God. But this space can be filled with anything, really. And we have forfeited many opportunities to be filled with what belongs there in exchange for a filling up with the world and with things that look good and fun and nice, but are really destroying us and really are our destruction. And so we need to know this. We need to know that we have these vulnerabilities. We need to know that when the serpent told Eve that God didn't want them to eat from the tree because they would become like gods, knowing good and evil. The serpent did not lie. He did not make up some story. He wasn't lying on God, right? What he did was he played to Eve's own desires. And by playing to her own desires that he really had nothing to do with. See, the devil don't really have no power over us except the power we give him. But again, that's another video. But he played to Eve's own desire. Eve wanted to know right and wrong. Eve wanted to know. She wanted to understand what was good and what was bad. She wanted to know if she was messing up or not. It's that simple. And because she wanted to know, the serpent was able to manipulate her into disobeying God. And he was able to manipulate her into disobeying God. But little did he know that it was all a part of God's plan anyway. He had already preordained these humans to eat from this tree. In other words, he had preordained humanity to know right from wrong. It's that simple. And so we say that this is deep stuff and it's too, but it's really not. It's simple. But if we miss the simple stuff and we try to jump into the really deep stuff like the resurrection and the coming of the Christ and all these different things, not understanding the very basics, then we can easily be led astray by serpents like the one in the Garden of Eden. We can be very easily led astray. I don't know what's going on with my tongue today. Into half truths, and they're not lies. That most of the people out here in this world that's telling you about God, that's telling you about the Bible, they're not necessarily lying. They're just not telling you the truth. And that's what the serpent was like. They're telling you what you want to hear, and that's what the serpent was like. The serpent spoke to Eve to tell Eve the what she wanted to hear. She wanted to eat that fruit from that tree. He didn't make her do it. He just kept on telling her, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Nothing bad is going to happen, etc., etc. And she went on and she ate the fruit. And so we're dealing with this very same thing today. Again, study Genesis 1-4. It will enlighten your mind better than any 4 chapters of any book that you've probably ever read in your entire life. You study this Genesis 1-4 over and over until you feel like you have gotten everything you could possibly get out of it, and it will change your life in your understanding. You'll come to understand exactly what God has done for us, and why He's done it for us, and why it was necessary for us to have a quote unquote savior or salvation sent by God. Why is He rescuing humanity, and what is He rescuing humanity from? Why is humanity even here in the first place? That's a really good question, and Genesis 1-4 answers that question. Why are you here? And essentially, you are here to choose. You are here to choose, just like Eve chose. Eve chose to know instead of to be in ignorant bliss. Okay, she wanted to know rather than be in ignorant bliss. And we are here also to choose, just like Eve chose. We are here to choose between God and something else, and it's that simple.
Keep your eye out for more messages about God's image as it pertains to us. All this information will be coming out of Genesis 1-4, 4 very short chapters of the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. It gives you so much information in these 4 chapters. I mean, it is literally about everything in human existence is wrapped up in these stories in the first 4 chapters of our Bible. So just study it until you have exhausted every possible lesson that it has to teach, because it does have plenty of lessons to teach. I hope this has been a blessing to you, has at least opened your mind to want to know more, and to want to seek deeper, at least to understand who you are and why you're here. Well, that's it for me. Shalom, shalom. Please leave messages, comments, contact me if you have any questions. Have a blessed Shabbat.